Hello, good afternoon. I am Nancy Delanoche. I work for ACT-IAC as the Director for Community Engagement, and welcome to this month's IT Management and Modernization COI meeting. I just have a few quick announcements from ACT-IAC. One is we have several elections going on right now for various leadership positions. One, we have an election for the IAC Executive Committee. And if you are a POC or a point of contact for your particular organization, you would have received an email on how to vote. If you don't have that email, or you're not sure if you received it, or if you're not sure if you're the POC, send me an email, let me know, and I can help you get connected with the folks who run that election. Another one is COI elections. Right now we have 3 COIs with ongoing elections. This COI, IT Management and Modernization, that's for the industry chair position. Acquisition COI for the government chair position, and Customer Experience CX for the industry vice chair position. If you are a member of any of these COIs, you should have received an email from me directly. If not, like I said, shoot me an email or send me a message on the chat, and I'll make sure that you receive that online ballot. Another thing I wanted to highlight are recent ACT-IAC white papers that we have published. ATO's code from the Cyber COI, post-solicitation best practices from the acquisition COI, and the FIRE for Federal Health Research Studies from the Health COI. So those papers are available on the website. Feel free to check them out. They are open and available for anybody to download. All right, and I wanted to turn it over to our project leads, Mina. She's the principal at REI Systems, and Joreen Lee, enterprise business strategist and architect from the NASA Office of the CIO. And both Mina and Joreen are leaders for the current project of the COI on IT spend standardization. So take it away, Mina.
Great. Thank you so much. I'm very glad to be here. We're going to actually have Joreen kind of kick us off, explain our project and what we've been up to, and then I'll jump in and go into details on the recommendations. So, Joreen?
Yes, good afternoon. Sorry, the light here. Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for the opportunity for us to share the Federal IT Spend Standardization Project. So Lena is the project lead, and then I am the co-lead. And then we can turn to the next page, Mina, if you would. Thank you. And the project sponsor is Dan York from GSA. We are just very glad that this project can be run. And our today's agenda have project background. We share a little bit about project background and the value for standardization, project approach, and our core categorization, recommendation, and our next step. So moving on to next page, project backgrounds. So we propose federal government strategies to standardize and streamline collecting IT spend execution data so that we can provide the increased transparency and facilitate future automation. The opportunity for automation, it lies on how we can structure and how the data can be collected and streamlined. So quite a bit of problem, but we wanted to highlight a couple of them, especially these are the prominent one, lack of standardization and transparency for collecting and reporting IT spent, and that's the budget execution data. So difficult to track and manage IT spend data and budget versus the spend. And so the life cycle and then end-to-end process from budget to spend. So that's another challenge to track and manage. So those are the problems that we wanted to highlight, and our recommendation are focused on highlighting those. Objective. So we wanted to evaluate the strategy to link to IT budget and spend data, leveraging the agency federal systems of record. That's important because federal system of record, and that's what we go by and looking into those data sets. Develop business case to help mature IT spend processes and overall streamline and integrations. So our objective to see if we can, with our recommendations, to increase transparency and accountability and provide recommendation for best path forward. Consider the cost, the time schedule, and the political will. So moving on to next slide, it's a little bit crowded here because we want to highlight a few values. If we move forward with the standardization, what could specific value we can gain from, right? Meaning, why are we doing what we're doing? Why are we spending time to research and look into this and and propose for enhanced transparency. So transparency, enhancing transparency for the federal IT spending, it's not just number or data call. It really is about how to help the government to operate more effectively and efficiently. So the IT spend standardization will yield better transparency, with multiple values through the insight that help innovate, to help the industry to innovate collaboration, allow business partners or vendors to analyze the data and help us to um, um, have a better solutions, providing the need that government required. And then to increase strategic insight to help identify area we have technical, business, or operational efficiency improvement and opportunity. Of course, this would mean disrupting data silo through further integration, streamline, or even standardization. The IT spend is managed and report different reporting detail, and the crosswalk among and mapping different detail and structure, and will create additional insight and interoperabilities of different business operations, and help bridge the silo, and definitely and help us to gain some comparable data analytical capability. So connecting those data, making it more consistent across, and that would give us the better decision making analytic capability. Of course, we create a right level of insight to facilitate across different agencies to see what other organizations are doing and what other federal agencies are working on. And that would give us potential cost optimization and efficiency gain as well. So these update, including potentially, you will hear a little bit later for recommendation, recoding data to address the new product and services, and using the standardization framework like the TBM for the government. So there are a few little boxes on the right, and you will hear a little bit more in the recommendation side. Just a few highlight, reduce the data silo is one of the key things, right? The federal spend should have a standardized term and standardized mapping crosswalk mechanism uh, through multiple coding structure. For example, PSC, TBM, the structure that are obsoleted should be modernized and updated to reflect the current IT practices as well. So the other things is to enhance accountability, right? The common data architecture to improve multiple uh, um, phases of budget to execution, and that can help our budget processes and acquisition processes, and help us to have some throughout the IT budget execution planning insight and and bridge or give us a better accountability. Definitely modernize the classification technology. Some of those code are old and obsolete, not reflecting what we have in the new technology. So those are the things we would wanted to address and recommend. And the need for the political will to update those are essential in order to make some progress. So moving on to next slide. So a few things. These are few federal initiative um, being done in the past 10 years, including the Data Optimization Initiative, the Digital Accountability Transparency Act, and 2018, the Evidence-Based Policy Making Act, and also the TBM framework. Although it's not mandated, it was encouraged and widely adopted, but not fully consistently across different agencies. And then the last one is the Chip and Science Act. All these initiatives and help build the foundation of the need for IT transparency. And though they have a different objective, fundamentally the IT spend and IT transparency are essential for us to really be able to materialize the, the value that we all desire for. So do y'all have any questions so far? I know I didn't pause for each slide for question. We wanted to have interactive, get feedback as we go through the presentations. Anyone have questions? No? If not, I would turn this to Mina.
Okay, great. Thanks, Joreen. There was a question in the chat, but we took care of that. So there'll be more details on all of this information to come. So thank you for asking questions earlier. So just to give you an overview of kind of the approach for this effort, we really started by defining scope. There's so much out there that's available and that exists and things that have been done. But, you know, we realize that the budget formulation already has a lot of well-established processes. So for this effort, we really focused on spend and its related data and processes. So for this project, we'll define spend as expenditures or disbursements, but we also looked at areas that report obligation data to ensure that we're capturing the full life cycle and seeing where there might be gaps and how to connect all of this information together. IT spend scope also includes kind of most aspects related to the hardware, software, telecom, and services, things that you buy through kind of, you know, contracts and acquisitions. But one thing we also decided was, you know, should we include efforts around internal labor? There were definitely fewer available options for this, but since it is such a large portion of IT spend, we decided to take a look at that as well. And we wanted to provide some proposals on how to better understand costs in this category. Okay. So then once we defined our scope, we did an extensive environmental scan to understand the current state. Excuse me. We looked at all the available data sources, different frameworks, you know, prior efforts at standardization, pilots that have been done in the past, et cetera. So there's a large, you know, pool to choose from to really see how we could kind of best leverage work that was done and learn from that. So from there, we had started to kind of categorize everything. They fell into these three functional verticals, representing the financial management areas, acquisition practices, and internal labor. And then we broke out into the various subgroups to really focus in on these areas. Take a look at, you know, the data that's out there. We did analysis on that, looked at kind of the processes involved and developed some use cases for our recommendations. So all of those things will be provided shortly in our more detailed paper, excuse me, in supplemental resources. So our recommendations are going to, again, focus on increasing the standardization, streamlining the collection of data, and increasing transparency into IT spend. And we'll just dig right in and start to present a summary of those recommendations today. And again, all the details behind it, the use cases, supplemental resources, they'll be coming in the next few weeks. Okay. I see a question in the chat, Ruth, that labor is a significant portion. Yeah, so yes, we will provide some recommendations around that too. Thank you. All right. Okay, so then next, just quickly, we took each of the recommendations and categorized them in multiple ways to provide different perspectives based on stakeholder needs. You'll see in just a minute, there ended up being quite a few recommendations. It was hard to kind of hone in on them and digest them all. So by grouping them in these different ways, it can let you kind of focus in on the areas that's most relevant for you. So again, first we've got the functional verticals for the acquisition, financial management, and internal labor. Next, we group the recommendations based on span of control. So for maturity level 1, and it's not necessarily maturity level, but there was also level 1 categories in the IT management space that we didn't want to conflict with. So we'll call them maturity level 1. That's within kind of agency control. So that's something that agencies or offices can really start to implement and can have more of an immediate impact. Level 2 would be related to supplementing existing government-wide data sources. So while we have recommendations, those would need more detailed requirements and obviously some more coordination to be able to implement those. And then level 3 is related to updating, more broader government-wide policy. Again, that would require a lot more coordination. There's broader change, right, and impact and socialization needed for those recommendations. Okay. And then finally, we have kind of targeted areas of focus that we're calling it. So these are around spend methodology and strategy, right? How do I classify IT spend? Like what is it? Spend transparency and communication. So how to kind of understand what's out there and use the data sources, what can I get from that information? And then third would be the spend management and governance space. So, how can I manage the full life cycle of my spend budget to actuals? Any questions? All right. I see a question from Ayana real quickly about getting some internal labor workforce to identify scarce resources as costs. So Ayana, we'll talk about the recommendations and those should help you to get to that type of analysis. So I'll defer that to the internal labor section and we can follow up offline. All right. Okay, so then next are the recommendation themes. So these are the key themes that came out of the various subgroups. So just kind of ground you in how they're structured. So these are kind of overarching across the federal government landscape. And then we'll get into more specific recommendations on the next slide. So first, the group discussed, the existing federal and agency level data sources, reporting requirements, et cetera, and the value that they needed to get out of them. So all of the sub-team members agreed on leveraging the TBM framework. So as Joreen had mentioned, right, it's out there in the government, hasn't really been fully implemented or integrated. But, looking at the various options does at least provide the consistency in how we look at IT spend. It's already embedded in a lot of these initiatives and codification. But just independently, it provided a solid representation to really understand IT budget and spend. So a lot of our recommendations leverage these categorizations, but again, it's not the full implementation of TBM. We're just using that as a standard for categorizations. So next is to provide kind of a standard definition of terminology. So as we're all talking, we realize that we're all kind of using the same words, but it's not necessarily talking about the same thing, right? So I think, for example, when someone says IT spend, what does that actually refer to, right? Is it obligations, expenditures, commitments, et cetera, right? So we needed to establish like a common lexicon to have these informed discussions. There's also a big issue with traceability across the IT portfolio management lifecycle. So many agencies and other initiatives, right, really can't track from budget to actuals or track contracts to financial source systems, right? So we needed to look at options to incorporate and use standard identifiers throughout the process. And then the next few are around standards, centralization, and educating stakeholders on what's available and, again, how it can be used. So our subteams found that they're generally looking for the same type of information, but they all took different approaches on how to get there. They used different data sources, or they had to struggle to manually put together data that was already available. We learned about different processes or systems that are being used as we were talking, to one another. So if we can address and document all of these, right, as the comment was before, like, where is this knowledge library? It could really help greatly with standardization and streamlining of data, and really reduce the manual burden on agencies and stakeholders that are looking for information on IT spend. So, again, while there's many options available, most of them are only partially complete. And so this led to users having to, pull things together from multiple systems or start in one place for high level analysis is what we often found. But then they had to go to another system to kind of get supplemental detail, but again, hard to piece it together. So our recommendations propose, how we could help consolidate and streamline key data as much as reasonably possible for each stakeholder audience. Okay, great. Okay, so next, this is a lot. So this is the summary of all our recommendations. So it's not intended to kind of, be used in this format. There are other formats that break it out, but it gives you a high level overview to show kind of all of the related recommendations. So you'll see that in the legend, you've got the maturity levels for the agency, the government-wide data sources policies, and the maturity levels. If you have all three, such as the data standards, it just means that they apply to all of them. So it is organized by kind of the benefits, right, and standards, traceability, consistency, and enhanced transparency. And then you've got each of the recommendations that will correlate to the details in the subsequent documentation. Right. Okay. So given that there are so many recommendations, today we're really going to focus our time on the ones for that maturity level 1 with the agency level recommendations across the 3 verticals. The additional details on the maturity level 2 and 3 will be coming in the papers, and we're happy to have follow-on conversations to discuss those in more detail if that's desired by the community too. Okay. All right, so starting with the acquisitions recommendations. So again, this is things that agencies can do today in the acquisition vertical. Again, kind of looking at the current data that was available, we started to recommend standards on being able to first identify IT spend, right? So here we looked at various coding structures, NICS codes, PSC codes, et cetera. And then we found through the data analysis that the product service codes, or the PSCs, and using what, again, they call level 1 through level 2, level 3 categorizations. This is standard for the IT category management space and all the reporting that you see. So we're recommending that be a standard way for folks to be able to identify and capture all of the IT spend. So from the TBM framework, those product service codes do align to towers, and you can also report on solutions as well. So next, again, we saw issues with that ability to connect kind of that investment and procurement data. So again, there's the robust processes for budget formulation, right, and reporting all of that, but then it's hard to connect it as it goes through the process. So we found that the IT dashboard currently provides fields to capture a unique investment identifier, or UII. And understanding that IT dashboard is not necessarily a full data set, it's primarily for the CFO Act agencies. I think other agencies can report if they desire, but they're not required to. But it does have a large subset of the data. And it has that as well as fields to capture the PID, which is a primary contract identifier. So while that functionality is there and available in the system, it's actually only populated in maybe about 20% of the data set. So that's something that agencies can start working on today to enforce the use of these fields so that we can start to, begin to capture the relationships. The additional recommendations are really kind of focused around capturing and reporting the right level of granularity. So after formulation, there's that IGCE process. So this is again around kind of the budget, and then spend plans that are often developed at agencies that contain more details. So those two, while the IGC was that in and of itself, agencies did have to do, how they did it was not standardized, right? And so we found that every agency approached it differently. Same with spend plans. Some have them, some don't. Some are more detailed or not. But what we found is that as you go through the process, whatever you start with definitely does get more and more aggregated as you go through the downstream processes, and then your IT spend kind of tends to get lost in the mix and hard to pull out. So our recommendations are around kind of retaining these details as much as possible. There are FAR regulations that require the use of CLIN level details, but this is not strictly adhered to. So you can enter that into the details into your agency contract writing systems, but then downstream again, when it gets into the federal government source system, FPDS, it starts getting aggregated and again gets lost in the mix. So this is going to be addressed in our maturity level 2 recommendations. But, at the agency level, we do suggest capturing these details now at the start of the process and carrying that through as much as possible to prepare for future enhancements. Okay. There are also details, if folks are familiar, there's a federal integrated business frameworks that provides IT standards. So there are standards there that have kind of coding structures that capture the whole string of like cost pools, sub-pools, towers, sub-towers, or solutions. There's defined business capabilities, service measures, functions and activities that are all built from various authoritative resources. So that could also be leveraged to kind of organize how we're going to capture and retain the line level details. Okay. So then next, all of this information needs to be conveyed to the POCs that are going to be entering the data. So we know that the analytics that come out are really only as good as the data that's being entered. So education is really a critical factor. So your proposed kind of development and use of an agency playbook to help improve data quality. So again, there's already existing guidance and training modules out there to assist with this. There's product service code training on the DAU website, the ITBMO and the FTIM COP has contract data elements guidance to help kind of identify which fields and data points are key, and guidance on how to best input these to maximize the value that you can get from the data out after the fact. Okay. And then finally, additional insights can be gained from leveraging like machine learning capabilities on agency procurement details. We will provide a use case around that as well when we have the supplemental details, but this really provides a more kind of comprehensive and consistent method of categorizing IT costs, and it can get more granular than manual efforts if you have people just kind of looking through procurement data. Many agencies have really large volumes of data, and so it's not feasible for folks to do that without some kind of a systematic effort. Okay. So the level of analytics that you'll get out at the end, it is dependent on the maturity of your agency data, but really just getting started is key, because what you'll find is that, even if your data may not be the best, it'll start to organize it and put it in a way where you can focus on the areas that need the most improvement, and kind of, come up with a plan to get better over time. So you don't need to wait for your data to be clean, really, to get started with any of these recommendations. Okay. All right, and I see in the chat there's a comment from Ayana for agencies that may not use CLINs. Will task orders be included in the recommendations? We actually did not look at task orders, Ayana, but we can take a look at that and see how we can integrate that too. So thank you. Okay. All right, any other questions? All right. Okay, so then next is the financial management reporting areas. So this really carries similar themes, right? Here, a lot of folks use like the budget object class codes and sub-object class codes that are embedded in their financial systems. A lot of this aligns to the cost pools, and there's additional, towers and solutions reporting. But here we also see the need to kind of connect across the systems and retaining line level details. So again, as you go from your acquisition systems to your financial systems, we found half the time they're not connected at all. And then if they are, it just starts to get even more rolled up, and it's hard to kind of differentiate where the IT costs are from non-IT costs. So we would suggest implementation of some kind of unique identifiers to be able to track that through the system, right? We did find, as we looked at the government-wide sources, you have data that's fed from FPDS, which is the contract and award system of record, and SAM.gov. That feeds some obligations into USAspending.gov. But USAspending.gov is also supplemented with disbursements, which would help you get to actual spend. And that also contains that PID identifier, which can then be traced back to your IT dashboard data more systematically versus the manual reporting of actuals that is predominantly done today. So again, kind of within each step, slowly starting to integrate these identifiers to try to track data through that process. It won't be perfect, right? Because we do need this is source systems themselves to be able to retain some level of detail, but at least the structure will be there so that we can make incremental enhancements over time. Okay. There have also been various efforts over the years to kind of enhance that BOC structure to provide more granularity. For example, it's hard to differentiate like IT contract services from non-IT contract services. Those kind of changes do have a really large impact. And so it's harder to kind of move forward on some of those implementations. But we have seen a lot of success with agencies implementing kind of their own internal level of granularity. So you can separate those out, differentiate IT from non-IT, separate hardware from software, and then you can always crosswalk that back to the federal level BOCs. So again, agencies can leverage, there's a lot of good work in the FIBF IT standards to help with this recommendation as well. And Joreen, I saw you responded to the CLIN, so thank you for that. Okay, and then last but not least is the internal labor space. So as I mentioned earlier, this is really kind of the most inconsistent, right? So we did look at both civilian and non-civilian processes. In the civilian space, they have like the OPM job series and job codes. And then the nice OPM codes are available as well for everybody to use. In the non-civilian space, it was a little bit harder to find like one consistent standard across the board, but we did take a look at different coding structures and tried to see where the relationships were. But what we had kind of identified again up front is that there was really a great need to identify IT resources, right? So typically, I know people talk about 2210 categories, which are IT specialists, but they really don't cover all of the IT functions. And then they can, the other IT functions do get buried in other job codes. I know, for example, I think there was 1550s, there was a lot, there's like network and other type of kind of development work that happens, and program project management was a large one where you see that in many other job categories, but it's not captured if folks are just using the 2210s to identify all the IT resources. So the recommendations there are excuse me, to kind of leverage, there's additional parentheticals that are related to those, but take a look at the other job series. Okay. So the other thing that we found is that, if you can identify your IT resources, there was also little standardization and kind of identifying the cost related to these resources. Internal labor is generally just kind of reported as one large number. And so how do I identify the proportion of that? So to address this, we recommend leveraging, there's templates are again already available to help estimate the cost. This is based on OPM NICE code structure and identify cybersecurity related resources. So to fully leverage these templates, we do suggest having some additional granularity or the parentheticals that we mentioned to specify the IT-related resources. There's some technical categories that are not reflected or broken out as well in the NICE codes. So that additional granularity would be beneficial as well. And that's also part of our level 2 recommendations. Okay. And then we also found the need to have kind of traceability, right? So we don't have to map everything to align, but having some commonality where it's relevant is helpful. So when we looked at the civilian and the non-civilian job codes, we found that there was a lot of overlap. And, in the non-civilian space, for example, they had built out a lot more granularity that could be leveraged by the civilian communities. And vice versa, right? So I think collectively we could just benefit from the work done and coordinate across the federal government to share some of these best practices. Okay. And I see a couple of comments. So thank you, Olga 0343 for IT managers, management program analysts. Yep. So those were all definitely the areas that we found. We do have a use case on that as well, based on some analysis that we did to see where they have been using the NICE OPM codes for non-2210 categories. So look out for that to come in the next couple of weeks as well. All right. If no more questions, we'll keep going. So this shows kind of a end-to-end view of the various processes that we discussed and where the recommendations fit in. So again, there's a note that the IT dashboard is primarily for the CFO ACT agencies, but again, a large proportion of the IT spend. And so you've got kind of the different areas. You've got the acquisition, financial reporting, the IT dashboard and contracts, and the budget planning and formulation, and then the recommendations that go along with each. So, as we start to kind of implement this, so, this is really just that first step, and obviously what's kind of a complex ecosystem, right? So, we'll take this is where you can start to affect change, and then start to integrate the changes, hopefully with the federal government data resources. As you start to have data at inception, right, then we can start to slowly pass that through and get maturity throughout the federal life cycle. So we hope you found these recommendations helpful. And again, hope to continue the discussions to the next level to provide that kind of more holistic and transparent view of IT spend across the government. Any questions on this? Okay. All right. So then next steps here, we would like to get your feedback on these high-level recommendations. I know there's a few things that are in the chat. So Nancy, hopefully we can kind of retain that so that we can address those in the future. We will post the presentation on, I think, the ACT-IAC website, and we'll use the input that we got here from you all to kind of finalize and publish the more detailed white paper and supplemental recommendations. And we'll continue to kind of socialize our recommendations more broadly. So we are here to help, right? If there's something that folks found interesting and you want to see like how you can integrate some of these, I'm happy to have further discussions and help with that. And then again, have some future efforts to potentially continue work on the next two levels. All right. And then we also did want to send a special thank you and shout out to the members of our sub-team committees. So, you know, they did a lot of great work over the last several months. We started this effort late last year. And so, you know, it's great to see that everyone's still engaged and committed, and appreciate all the great work that everybody's done. Mm-hmm. Okay, and then just as for your reference later in the appendix, there were a lot of acronyms that we had also used here. So we've got a list of those available for you. And then you can see the breakout here, that kind of all-encompassing recommendations table. It's broken out here in the same format, like one page for each of the maturity levels. So you've got the level 1 that we just went through here, and then you've got the level 2 and the level 3, so that you can take a look at those. And then again, this is kind of based on the area of focus that we had mentioned before, and it, you know, gives you a summary of the use cases that you'll be expecting to see shortly. So that's the area of focus 1, 2, and 3. And thank you. Okay, I see a couple questions in the chat. So Nancy, I think we can email out the PowerPoint as well as post it on the ACT-IAC site. Is that correct?
Yes, absolutely. I can share this PowerPoint slide deck to everybody here who attended the meeting, or if you have something specific, feel free to shoot me an email. But also, there's a question here about how to join a committee from Tanya. There's still time, right, Mina and Joreen, to join a committee?
Yeah, we are kind of at the tail end. We do have some folks who had volunteered to help us review the final deliverables and the white papers. So Tanya, if you'd like to join us, if you want to shoot Joreen and I an email, then you know we can find a way to get you engaged. Okay. So any other questions? Okay, great. Well, again, thank you everyone for your time, and to everyone for participating in this work group. Excuse me. Again, we'll send out more details on this to come, but we're definitely looking for feedback on the recommendations, if there's anything else to consider, or if you have insights or have, you know, examples of how you leverage any of these, you know, we would love to hear that. Nancy, anything else you want to close us out?